Here's everything you need to know about the sixth house within traditional astrology. The sixth house is considered to be one of the most malefic houses of heaven. And the reason for that is because any house within our birth chart that doesn't have a direct relationship to the ascendant is thought of as being an evil or an abject house of heaven. Now, when it comes to the sixth house is having a quincunx relationship to the first house. And as we know, the quincunx is one of the most challenging relationships that exists within traditional astrology. When two planets are having a quincunx relationship with each other, the two of them are absolutely determined not to be in any sort of contact with each other at all. And so obvious is their determination not to communicate with each other that the entire world can see that there is something wrong manifesting between them. And so, within traditional astrology, we tend to hear a lot of people saying that the quincunx means that the planets cannot see each other, and therefore they have no regard for each other. That's not how the quincunx manifests in an actual applied astrological practice. In an actual applied astrological practice, if the significators of your parents have a quincunx relationship to each other, it doesn't mean that they don't see each other and therefore they stay out of each other's way. It means that there's a relationship of abject hatred that's manifesting within your life as a result of the relationship between your parents, or that there is a relationship of abject hatred that exists between your two parents. When the ruler of the ascendant and the ruler of the seventh house have a quincunx relationship with each other, that oftentimes is something that we see manifesting within the charts of people who experience divorce as a constant theme within any marriage that they enter, to the point of them feeling as if marriage is something that they're just not cut out for. So the quincunx, as far as relationships in traditional astrology, is one of the most challenging relationships that exists within our entire practice. Therefore, the quincunx relationship that exists between the sixth house and the first house is a relationship of abject hatred. The sixth house is the house of sickness. And the reason why it's the house of sickness is because the sixth house is having the quincunx relationship to the ascendant. It is a house where we go to fall ill. Now, we know that traditionally speaking, the sixth house is considered to be the house of sickness and slaves. I don't like to talk about no slaves in the 21st century, so as a result of that, I call the sixth house of sickness and stress. Because oftentimes when we find the ruler of the ascendant in the sixth house, it's representing that that person is under an inordinate amount of stress within their lifetime. Even when they don't have to put themselves in a position of servitude, they're still putting themselves in a position of servitude. Even when no one has asked anything of them, they still find themselves carrying the burdens of everyone else around them. Even when this person is a multi-millionaire, at their own party, they're the ones serving hors d'oeuvres on a tray with an apron around their waist, because there is something built within their soul and psyche to predispose them to being a slave or a servant to humanity within this lifetime, which is nice. This is something we oftentimes see within the charts of doctors and people working in the medical profession. In general, traditionally speaking, we are told that people who have the conjunction of Venus and Mars in their sixth house are people who make good doctors, because the Mars in the sixth house knows how to cut you open, and the Venus in the sixth house knows how to stitch you back together without leaving a trace. So it's a wonderful placement to have those two planets in the sixth house as far as doctors are concerned. And sometimes we even find the ruler of the ascendant in the sixth house in the charts of doctors, in the chart that otherwise also points in the direction of medicine being something that that person is practicing within this lifetime. Now, as a result of the amount of stress that we find ourselves taking into ourselves in the sixth house, we also find ourselves suffering from diseases and illnesses that are foundationally stress and anxiety based. So, if you're somebody with the rule of your ascendant in your sixth house, then it's important to know that when we have the rule of the ascendant in the sixth house, we don't know how to slow down, we don't know how to calm down, we only know how to keep on going. And as a result of that, we might find ourselves putting our own needs for health and vitality and well being secondary to the needs of everything else going on around us. And resultantly, we may fall ill as a result of us putting our personal health on the back burner. If we were to apply the Chaldean order to the 12 houses, the sixth house is corresponding with the planet Mercury. And the reason why the sixth house corresponds with Mercury is because just as the sixth house represents our own servants within this lifetime, Mercury was the servant of the gods. And to this end, the sixth house is having to do with our employees for those of us who find ourselves in a position to be self-employed within this lifetime. The sixth house also has to do with small animals, which I think is kind of interesting because it's the most random thing in the world to have houses purely based on people and the things within their lives, and also now to find small animals randomly thrown into the sixth house. But the reality is that small animals do represent a very big part of how we exist within the world, whether we are consuming animal products or whether we find ourselves in ownership of pets. This idea of animals and of animal life is found within our 12 houses because even the life of an animal is meant to be registered within our chart of birth. So, the sixth house is also the house of small animals. And when the traditional astrologers were put to the task of having to define what a small animal was, they said anything smaller than a goat, because everything larger than a goat is found within our 12th house. So there you have it. The sixth house is representing sickness, our servants, in other words, our employees, as well as our small animals within this lifetime. Now, if we were to speak about the terrestrial houses of joy of the planets, the sixth house is corresponding with Mars. And the reason why the sixth house is corresponding with Mars is because the ancients thought that the sixth house represented pestilence that shot its arrows into our sphere of health that we use to find vitality for ourselves within this lifetime. And in the same way as sickness pierces our sphere of health and vitality, Mars is the god of pestilence, as well as disease, as well as all of the things that occur within our environment that afflict the very health and vitality that we're meant to have within this lifetime. Now, another thing interesting with the sixth house that we find more so within 17th century astrology is that there is this distinction between the sixth house being the house of acute illness, whereas the 12th house is the house of chronic illness. And this is something that we'll discuss more fully later when we dive into the 12th house specifically. But this is something that we should know that the sixth house is more so considered to be a house of acute illnesses because the chronic illnesses that we have within this lifetime are the hidden enemies that we find within our 12th house. However, from an applied astrological perspective, both of these houses, both the 6th house and the 12th house, are on the spectrum of chronic illness, and we shouldn't think that the 12th house represents issues more detrimental for our bodies than the 6th house, because the 6th house is definitely representing issues that have the ability to be terminal as well. Now, as far as planets that have a natural analogy with the 6th house are concerned, what's good for the goose isn't necessarily good for the gander. So the planets that are naturally associated with the 6th house are planets that bring pestilence and disease. Pluto and Uranus in the 6th house could be thought of as bringing pestilence and disease. Now, I don't necessarily think this is true because I don't necessarily have something to say about each and every one of the planets in each and every one of the houses. So having Pluto or Uranus in the 6th house has yielded far less information for me than people who have Neptune in the 6th house. When a person has Neptune in the 6th house, this can often indicate that their marital partner within this lifetime is somebody who is dealing with addiction, and it can particularly be an indication that that person's marital partner within this lifetime is somebody who is an alcoholic. And the reason for this is because we associate Neptune with alcohol and being inebriated in general. And so, very often in a chart in which the ruler of the 7th house is already afflicted, if we also find Neptune in the 12th house of the partner, which is the 6th house of the chart, this is indicative of the fact that that person's partner is probably struggling with an addiction of some kind, and more often than not, that addiction is alcohol abuse. So I have things to say about Neptune in the sixth house, but not things to say about Pluto and Uranus in the sixth house. And I think as astrologers, we need to know that we're not going to always have something to say about everything. Other planets that are having a naturally challenging relationship in the sixth house are definitely going to be Mars and Saturn, because having Saturn in the sixth house can say that sickness is something that is your major challenge within this lifetime. And Mars within the sixth house is saying that inflammatory issues could particularly be your major challenge within this lifetime. Jupiter and Venus thrive well in the sixth house because Jupiter and Venus have the ability of turning back the hands of some of the challenges that the sixth house would naturally imply. The moon is kind of neither here nor there. She's a pretty neutral planet as far as the sixth house is concerned. And so is Mercury a neutral planet as far as the sixth house is concerned, even though having Mercury in the sixth house might be indicative of the fact that you are hiring younger people within this lifetime. Finally, having the sun in the sixth house is thought of as being particularly challenging because, from a universal perspective, the sun is representing our health and vitality, and we don't really like to have our health and vitality in the sixth house of sickness. So, having the sun within the sixth house is thought to be a challenge in general, and it's definitely that much more challenging, especially if the sun is afflicted by malefic aspects from other planets while in that house. Now, on to the topic of the nodes in the sixth house. Neither of the nodes in the sixth house represents a source of good. And the reason for that is because it seems as if when we have the nodal axis of north node and south node in the axis of the sixth and the 12th house, this oftentimes is something that we see within the charts of people who are navigating challenging considerations as far as their health is concerned, and particularly challenging chronic issues in this lifetime as far as their health is concerned. This is as true for South Node in the sixth house as it is for having North Node in the sixth house. Both of these elements in the sixth house represent a source of challenge as far as one's physical health and vitality. And it says that this axis of illness is going to be heavily highlighted within your life within this lifetime. If it isn't manifesting specifically as illness, it's referring to this axis of heightened stress manifesting as a huge consideration for you within this lifetime.